for the next seminars. The seminar series was thought as an hybrid format, because actually what we did was we used the opportunity of the seminars to record podcasts. So we don't have a web page, a cool web page as you have yet, but we have a channel on Spotify, and feel free to, of course, listen to the podcast. There are 4 episodes. Each episode focuses on some topics related to the democratic innovations. And the idea is to keep this going from September onwards. Another word, this seminar is also sponsored by an EU project, INCITE-DEM, and feel free also to enjoy the website. INCITE-DEM is a project on democratic innovations and sustainability. And last, this seminars is also sponsored by one of the research groups of at ICS. The research group is RIGoP, Regimes, Institutions, Governance and Policies. And that's it. Let me introduce briefly now our guest. Andrea Felicetti is an assistant professor at the University of Padua. In 2014, he earned his PhD at the School of Politics and International Relations at the Centre for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance in the Australian National University. Andrea has worked in research centers in Australia, France, Italy, Belgium, and is the author of Deliberative Democracy and Social Movements, published in 2016, and co-author of Discursive Terms and Critical Junctures, published in 2020. Andrea has published in international academic journals and is involved also in several national and international research networks. And that's it. The stage is yours. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, everybody, for attending this morning here or from home. It's always nice to be invited at a seminar series. It's twice as nice when it's a cool seminar series. No, jokes aside, this is a great place for research on participation from many different points of view, and it's a great opportunity for me to talk with you. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And having said this, today I will be talking about democratic innovations specifically, which is a very narrow, if you wish, segment of the broader field of participation. But we will try to go into some details of this narrow aspect. Now, let me see, where are my slides? And so I don't really, but okay, this is probably, okay. And this is it. So I hope you can see it from home as well. Now, I don't know whether to stand. I keep sitting then. I hope you can see it from home. And those who are at home, if you feel like you need to ask something, please just speak up. Okay. Because I may not see if you raise your hand. Likewise, feel free to stop me at any time if you need to ask a question or if you have a comment. Okay, can we get started, you think? Yes. So when Roberto first invited me to present my work here, he wanted me to take advantage of this opportunity to reflect about democratic innovations, in particular about the topic of citizen-led democratic innovations. That is a kind of democratic innovation where citizens have a prominent role. So, and he also told me you don't need a paper. And so that relieved me of a lot of stress, so to say. And it was an opportunity for me to think freely. And therefore, what I will be presenting is the result of this free reflection. Perhaps it's not as structured as it should be, but why not taking advantage of the invitation to do so. So the problem that I would like to address today is the democratic quality of so-called democratic innovations. Because unlike what the label democratic innovation suggests, there is some reflection to be done about the democratic properties of these new participatory and deliberative devices. So to begin with, a couple of definitions to understand analytically what we're talking about. So democratic innovations, the term has been coined by Graham Smith in 2009. And it's not that before his book, his seminal book, there was no research on democratic innovations or no democratic innovations. But this book was a starting point for a flourishing academic debate on this aspect of democracy. And so the concept has evolved and refined over time. As you can see, the second definition provided in this slide comes 10 years after the first one, and it is a bit more nuanced. However, at the end of the day, democratic innovations have to do with finding ways, hopefully original ways, to deepen democracy in our systems. I provide some examples just to be on the same page as to what I'm talking about. Institutional examples of democratic innovations can be participatory budgeting, which you know very well in Portugal as compared to other countries, including my own, Italy. There are citizen assemblies that are now more and more popular. I take a picture. I got a picture here of one of the Irish citizen assemblies. They are probably the most advanced and well-known instances of citizen assemblies. Democratic innovations, however, also occur also in the public sphere, not just in institutions. The acampada, for instance, is a democratic practice of the Indignados movement, anti-austerity movement, that help this movement to create spaces for meaningful democratic engagement that can be considered as a democratic innovation. It's just not taking place within institutions. Likewise, sit-ins, civil rights movements in the United States, they were born as a means to fight against structural racism in the United States. And then they've been adopted worldwide in occasion of protests for all sorts of different democratic ends. And then there is the G1000, which is people's self-called deliberative assembly on a huge scale. 1,000 people in the end participated in the final event. That was took place during one of the long periods of stalemate that follow elections in Belgium. Very difficult to form a government, nothing gets done for a year or so, and people get sick of it. So rather than smashing windows, some of them got organized and offered an example of how politics could be done differently. Final example, I call it mixed. So here it's when public sphere, civil society meet institutions in the context of democratic innovations. So ideas that start from civil society are implemented and end up interesting institutions. Icelandic crowdsourced constitutional process. It's a very innovative way to reform constitutions that it's very interesting despite it failed to attain constitutional change. There is also the example of ICS-DEM. Let's call it a platform for participation that is highly effective. It's become a model through Europe, and it started in Barcelona thanks to the proximity of the local administration with activist circles. So democratic innovations can get started in different places and sometimes brings institutions and activists together. Okay, this is what we are talking about essentially. Now, I'm not the first one to engage with the notion of democratic innovation with the label of it. Many great authors have done that before me. And actually, my idea, it's not really to find a better term for it. It's to reflect deeply about its meaning. However, Graham Smith himself, as well as Yves Saint-Omer, Akonfang, Carol Pittman, have highlighted problems with this notion. There is the risk of overgeneralization. bounding up everything together, also very different things. Different mechanisms, when they are brought together under this term, perhaps we risk hiding the differences that they have. And then there is someone else, Arconfang in this case, has highlighted the problem with the excessive emphasis on novelty. So as if being new, it's good in itself. Carol Pateman has pointed out that the notion of democratic innovation attracts our interest on what's good or desirable in terms of change, and tends to leave unquestioned, however, the structural existing power structures. So we look at how beautiful these small things are and risk losing the broader picture, which I think is something we do quite systematically. We can discuss not only about the democratic qualities of democratic innovations, but also about the innovation side of democratic innovations. For instance, there are some innovations that are actually pretty old. Think of all sorts of consultations and referendums. According to some, most referendums are not democratic innovations because they've been around forever. And that's one reason why they should not be considered democratic innovations. There are also innovations that are pretty old, but novel to a given context. Think of participatory budgeting, that it's not new here, but it's new to some other countries and local places that are doing it for the first time these days. Some innovations are probably not new, in the sense that they follow processes of adoption and adaption. Donatella Della Porta highlighted this. An example is climate assemblies. They are new in the sense that it's the first time they're being done, but they really take the model of citizen assemblies and target it towards climate change. Then there are some innovations that are actually innovative. And in my case, the best example is the Citizen Initiative Review. In Oregon, before the referendum, the citizen initiative that implies a vote on issues that have been raised from the bottom up, has been introduced a moment of popular deliberation, so a citizen jury, and the outcome of this citizen deliberation is sent to the households of all people living in the state of Oregon, and that introduces a moment of deliberation within the broader context of referendum competition, which is dysfunctional in many ways, certainly from a deliberative point of view. So, that's a new idea of how referendums should be done. And I think that's actually innovative. However, that's not the main question of my presentation. My presentation focuses not on the innovation bit, but on the democratic aspect. So the answer to the question, are democratic innovations really democratic? As for many other answers, it depends. And it depends on a couple of things from my point of view. They can be democratic or not, depending on how democratic innovations come about. There are some that are bottom-up, for instance, and some that are top-down. And the former are arguably more democratic than the latter from this point of view. They can be more or less democratic depending on the way they work. So there are democratic innovations that are highly inclusive. Think of a participatory forum, and others that are kept within elite circles. Think of stakeholder focus groups. Then democratic innovations can be more or less democratic depending on their impact. That is, their outcome can contribute, for instance, to give voice to marginalized groups, or can reinforce societal marginalization if a process ends up with a certain kind of policy suggestions, for instance. And so the democratic qualities change. So essentially, there are plenty of reasons to investigate these qualities, and that is being done. Luckily. Another aspect upon which depends our answer to the question I pose is what we mean by democratic. So not democratic innovation, not democratic tool, not democratic institution can be democratic in all sorts of ways. An institution, a process can be eminently democratic from a participatory point of view, and less so from a deliberative one. Can be very good agonistic democracy, and very poor in terms of electoral or direct democracy. So essentially depends on what we mean by democracy. So the same process might look very different depending on what lenses we use to analyze it. And now there is another point. What I'm saying holds, especially as far as scholars' understanding of democratic innovations is concerned. There are theories that reflect on the normative value of democratic innovations, and there are empirical researchers that give elements to reflect critically about them. However, also activists, citizens, stakeholders, such as politicians that have a stake in the success or failure of democratic innovations, have their own idea about the democratic qualities of these innovations. This leads to the need to study different perspectives on democratic innovations. So there are those who are studying how different actors look at democratic innovations to learn about their views. More recently, some have argued, and have started to do it, that we need to look at different perspectives, those of activists, citizens, and other stakeholders, to learn not about them, but with them and from them, what democratic innovation means, okay? So this is being done. And here it's an important point, I think, that follows from the previous discussion. Whereas scholarly debate contributes to a certain normative legitimacy of democratic innovations, other actors' judgment on innovation, whether it is democratic or not, determines its perceived legitimacy. So it's not us establishing the democratic qualities of these innovations, but it's not only us for sure, but it's mostly other actors doing this. And this, I think, it's something we should bear in mind a bit more than we currently do. This is the democratic innovation as I see it. Now let's zoom in into citizen-led democratic innovation. And I'm zooming in on this aspect, not just because I was invited to do so by Roberto, but because I came to believe that this element is particularly relevant in connection to what I've been saying so far, that is the democratic qualities of innovations. So citizen-led democratic innovation, for me, means something slightly different than what it meant 2 years ago. So I don't actually mean citizens are the main driving force of democratic innovations, because if I did, then there are really very few democratic innovations that are citizen-led. I now more modestly intend by citizen-led democratic innovations, those innovations where citizens have at least a proactive role in the process, and so are not just being involved or engaged. And by proactive role, I mean that citizens give direction to the process rather than just to the outcome of the process. So the way the whole thing is conceived rather than just the policy recommendation, for instance, okay? This is leading, in my understanding of the term. And then a question follows then. Shouldn't democratic innovations always be citizen-led anyway? I mean, in democracy, there is a special connection between the citizenry and institutions. So, I mean, if they're not citizen-led, then what are they? Well, I think I understand this point that I'm making myself, so I better understand it. But however, it needs not to be this way. Democratic innovation can occur in ways that are not led by citizens, and in practice, that's how it often occurs. For instance, democratic innovations might be led in ways that are democratic in one specific sense. For instance, when political representatives decide that it's necessary to introduce a democratic innovation. Or they can be, for instance, introduced or led in ways that do not have much to do with democracy at all, such as researchers' experiments. So a research community being interested in trying out a new democratic innovation and actually doing it, it's not a celebration of democratic input. It belongs to the interest of some actors, not the citizenry. And now there is another clarification that needs to be done. When I talk about citizens, I really should talk about publics. It's not like citizens that lead these kind of processes. It's more active parts of civil society, publics, components of public sphere, that act proactive, if at all, in democratic innovations. However, I still stick to the word citizens because that's how it's been used so far. And also it's a bit weird to talk about public-led democratic innovations, let alone public-led mini publics. It starts to get a bit too convoluted. So I stick to citizens, but I really mean publics. And probably there is a big issue there, but that's how I came to see it. It's not really citizens, it's some groups within the citizenry that can be protagonists in these processes. Are citizens, and so from here, so a question that then becomes central, having said this in my discussion, is whether someone is asking for, or better, demanding democratic innovations. Because if we want to know about whether these innovations are democratic, I think we should start paying more attention to this aspect. There is empirical research that is being done on different groups' opinions about democratic innovations, and it's not clear at all that this is what people are asking for. And this is a great strand of research. However, to me, in relation to our discussion this morning, what's important, it's a different problem, is who is actually demanding democratic innovations. That is, who has an interest in the process rather than just the outcome and acts upon that interest. So asking for democratic innovation means asking for a different way of doing democracy. It's a question about the process more than the outcome, or more than the outcome only. So it's a specific kind of question, very specific. If we look at who's asking what, we can gain some insight from social movement studies. Social movement studies, for instance, tell us that social movements, it's not only that they ask about democratic innovations, they actually do democratic innovations. Sometimes they change their way of doing democracy within themselves, as we have seen also from some of the pictures. We've also learned from social movement studies that the action of democratic of social movements might lead to democratic innovation. So even if they don't ask for it, they might facilitate a context that is innovative in democratic terms. Movements asking for democratic innovation specifically, that is, for a different process, are actually rare, however, despite all that I've been saying. They're not absent altogether at the same time. So when someone tells us the Gilets jaunes asked for certain kind of democratic innovations and Extinction Rebellion is asking for citizen assemblies, that's true, but they're not really the rule. Okay, a lot of movements are not demanding democratic innovations. They're demanding policy outcomes, cultural change, other kind of stuff, to which democratic innovation might be instrumental. To give you an idea, we have two different extremes in social movements. Extinction Rebellion asks for citizen assemblies, and here we have a collective from the Italian social movement scene. It's called Wooming. That in this statement, I kept it in Italian, in its original language, is essentially saying that here they're talking about participatory forums being an instrument that administration used more and more often with very negative results. And usually they're criticized for being just facade of participation. And just to be able for the administration to say, you know, we've been looking at you, we've been listening to you, you talked, and now we answer that we don't care about you. Now, what do you want? What else do you want from us? We've set it up, and that's it. That's where democratic participation should end. So, you know, these are two very different positions when it comes to... No, it's before it was invented. But the rest is all written.
It was very similar to our experiment.
Yeah, right. Yeah. In fact, yesterday we asked ChatGPT to give us a critique of democratic innovation in very blunt terms, unpolite, and it was similar to this one.
And also an unpolite definitions of ourselves, so
Which is fantastic.
it was tough. But
Don't do it on a day that you're feeling sad. Okay, so that's what social movement studies tell us. And so here there is a story, I think, that is relevant for my problem about the need to make sure about the demand for democratic innovation. That rarely publics or citizens get what they want. Actually, it's only in the cases that I put in bold that citizens get what they want. Usually, citizens or publics are not asking for any democratic innovation, and they are not given any. Standard practice. Citizens are being given democratic innovations that they never asked for. So this is another situation that it's not really super functional from my point of view. Let's see if, okay, for instance, so an instance of the first citizen not asking for any democratic innovation, not being given any, it's kind of Italian situation at the national level. It's not like there is a big push for democratic innovation and the government is really not into this kind of stuff. Citizens being given a democratic innovation they are never asked for, it's the Italian Osservatorio Alta Velocità. It's not like people in the place were asked for this participatory forum about the high-speed rail that should connect Turin to Lyon. The government came up with the idea, and this participatory process was set in place and exacerbating problems. Citizens asking for a given democratic innovation and being given another one. If we think about the French Great National Debate, that's not what the Gilets jaunes were asking for. They were asking for a different process, more participatory and direct democracy. But the president of France, Macron, offered them a deliberative forum that they hated. So actually, when these situations happen, the democratic innovation can be embraced, in which case we are lucky. Otherwise, they can be ignored or rejected. There are the last two circumstances, however, that are very good when they happen. The citizens ask for a given democratic innovation, and that's the one they get. And this is sort of what's happening with climate assemblies. A social movement asks for it, and after a lot of messing around, they get it. They do it, and some people are happy with it, others don't. And then the final situation is when citizens want a given democratic innovation and do it themselves, like the G1000. Okay, so this is another instance in which people do it themselves without waiting for the administration. So what I would like to get out of this slide is that the very good context to introduce democratic innovation, it's kind of an exception rather than the rule. And when democratic innovation is asked for, is demanded, this can be done for different reasons. And here is an important point, I think. Someone, either the public or institutions, can be interested in democratic innovations in light of a policy objective. Take Extinction Rebellion. We think that through citizen assemblies, people are really gonna suggest that the government develops a more green, climate-friendly agenda. Because when you get citizens around the table to deliberate, they understand that there is a problem, and so they push the government in that direction. So here there is an interest for democratic innovation considering a policy objective. Or there might even be an interest in both process and policy objective. When you expect sort of an overlap. So deliberation is a good way of doing things, or participation a good way of doing things, and it will lead to a desirable outcome. If we have the poorer segments of population in Porto Alegre to participate in a participatory budgeting, they might actually steer resources towards the periphery rather than keep them in the center. Okay, there is an expectation of overlap that then might fail, but that was the plan to ask for it. And then in some instances, there is just an interest in the process. For instance, when researchers propose to do some democratic experiment. They're just interested in studying how these things work. So depending on these three situations, we face three different landscapes, options, and it really makes a difference whether we look at these different options from the bottom-up processes, from the citizen-led processes, and the top-down ones. If you have an interest for democratic innovations considering a policy objective, that's fine if public sphere does it, unless that they want to use democratic innovation for anti-democratic ends. That's it. Let's have a referendum, which is not really a democratic innovation, but to give you an idea, to close all the places of cult of a certain religious group. Because we know if we put it on a referendum, we might actually get this to pass. That serves an anti-democratic end, and so it's problematic. But if it's not that situation, then it's fine. They use an instrument to get across their policy options. But when this logic is adopted from top-down processes that are the bulk of democratic innovations, there is the risk of weaponization of democratic innovations. And I go back to the example of Osservatorio Alta Velocità, the forum that was called by the Italian government to talk about the high-speed train connecting Lyon to Turin. Essentially, that forum, it's established, we also have a few papers on this, was used as a means to bypass protests. So those who subscribe to the fact that the project has to do are welcome to the participatory forum. The others stay outside of it. It's the same logic as the one I just discussed from bottom-up mobilization, but it's much more dangerous. Interest in both process and the expected overlap approach. If you do it with citizen-led processes, that's fine, as long as everyone is happy with it. That is, if you use climate assemblies with the expectation that you will come up with a progressive agenda on climate change, good for you. Let's hope it works out. If it doesn't, well, you might take issue with the way the process was done. And that's a bit of a problem from a democratic point of view, democratic innovation point of view, because if everybody starts to criticize the process every time that it does not deliver on your expectation, in the long term, this thing gets discredited. But outside of this situation, it's a fair game that they're playing, these grassroots actors are playing. If institutions have the same expected overlap approach, there is the risk of instrumentalization. And I see this happening, for instance, with what I'm studying as well, that is the governance of genome editing. Genome editing is developing a lot, biotechnologies are developing very fast, and the public doesn't really discuss this. So what many interest groups are doing is to convey democratic innovations to a group of patients to discuss about legislation regarding genome editing. Now, of course, if you ask patients on the viability of genome editing, you will have certain responses that are highly understandable coming from people with a genetic condition. However, the rest of the public might think likewise. So the risk is here it's of instrumentalizing democratic innovation to get some desirable policy outcomes. I'm not saying that this does not have to be done, but it has its challenges from a democratic point of view. And since we're talking about democratic innovations, these are serious challenges. Finally, interest in the process. If you're interested in the process and propose a democratic innovation from the citizen perspective, that's good. As long as it is not a waste of resources. So if you do these experiments, as academics do often, and they keep having no bearing on policy making or on the public culture around political topics, then from a democratic point of view, it might be a good exercise, but it doesn't really change much. That's the greatest harm it can do.
if you do it from an institutional point of view, then the threat is greater. There is a risk of disembeddedness. That is from the top, you bring exercises of democracy to the population in ways that the citizen don't own, don't make their own. So essentially, if there is any form of involvement around an issue, you sort of bypass it by proceeding in this way. So the bigger point here is that demand for democratic innovation can be led by different interests, and the interest of top-down democratic innovation is much more dangerous than the one that processes led by citizens have. So this is one good reason to keep an eye on these aspects. Having, as a way of recap and making some final point, I have a few slides. We know that citizens can contribute to democratic innovations. They can begin a process of democratic innovation, they can shape it, and they can foster its impact. That is, they can help the decisions taken in a participatory budgeting to be implemented properly, for instance. So they can have a role. But when they do not take that role, that's not indifferent, that's problematic. Because if citizens or publics are absent, that risks jeopardizing the democratic qualities of innovation. So it's not that citizen-led democratic innovation is better than the other one. It's kind of a requirement for democratic innovation to be democratic. Citizen proactive role in a given democratic innovation doesn't warrant its democratic credentials, but contributes to it. So it's not that, okay, there are citizens, we are safe from a democratic point of view. Many things can still go wrong, but at least we have this element. And citizen-led democratic innovation is not just yet another taxonomic category. So it's a way of understanding democratic innovation that goes at the heart of the democratic nature of innovation or lack thereof. So I was lucky to have to focus on this topic for the sake of this presentation. So okay, that's my argument. And if that's how things work, what can we make of it? Can we do anything to account for these dynamics? I think that a first step we should take is to conceive of innovations that are democratic by investigating the nature and extent of popular demand for it. Because as we've seen, there might be different types of demand for it and different actors asking for them. And this difference in actors, as I highlighted before, it's important when it comes to institutions or public sphere. It could be environmentalist groups asking for them. It could be the citizenry, never seen yet, but it could be. Business communities asking for it at the moment, and that makes a difference. There might otherwise be opposition to democratic innovations coming from environmentalists, from business communities, and we should take this into account. But most likely, what we will find if we start looking at this, it's a lack of demand for this kind of democratic innovation. Or at least, let's say it's not the most common answer we will get, but it's entirely possible. And if we see this kind of situation when we look at the context before running a democratic innovation, that, in my humble opinion, doesn't necessarily mean we should not proceed with democratic innovation. Because if that's the case, we are no longer going to proceed at all, or 90% of cases. That's a possibility, however. We might well hold back from starting the process. But more importantly, I think we need to acknowledge we are in front of a challenging situation for our innovation to be democratic. So it's not like social movements really hate these forms of collaborations, or politicians are really greedy and don't want to give power away. It's that these actors, as well as many others, have their own views on democratic innovations, which we are better to take into account empirically beforehand, rather than realizing them after the process has been done. So acknowledging these dynamics is something I think we should do more in order to grant some democratic strength to innovations. And to conclude, we know that democratic innovations can be designed and in excellent ways, as the recent contributions by Michael Sauer show. But we also know, and we know it for a long time, that public spheres cannot and ought not to be engineered. So we can play with democratic innovation. We cannot really play with the public sphere. And we should not, therefore, play with democratic innovations anytime we have funds to do so, or we see the political opportunity and we want to seize it. We should be aware of the context in which these things are going to play out. So the final line is that in light of what I've been saying, we should keep trying hard to engineer design innovation, which is democratic. And that means innovation that doesn't harm democratic public spheres that are already there anyway, regardless of our innovation, and doesn't leave behind citizens. So what I've been saying today, that is making sure of what kind of context we are going to enter, is a way to make sure that we don't do democratic harm, actually, rather than democratic good, which is what inspires our work as researchers and the work of those who advocate for democratic innovations. I think with this last slide, I finished. Thank you very much for your attention and understanding. Okay, I can drink now.
Glass of water.
Do we have any? No, yeah. Don't worry about it. Okay, from home I don't see hands that have been raised. So
Want to stop sharing and open the
interromper.
yeah.
Up post. Okay, we're just one among many.
One in exam. One in
Huh?
one in
How does it work now? How does it work now?
Yeah. For questions. Yeah, we can collect some questions. One. Do you want to start, Joseph?
Sure.
Yeah, please. And also, yeah, okay. We'll start with you.
First of all, thank you so much for the very intriguing question on or debates on thinking about how democratic innovations are. I'm particularly interested on something you said, that before you believe that citizen-led democratic innovations, the quality of led was citizens actually leading them, but then now more modestly, more modestly, you think that it doesn't have to necessarily be about leading them, but by being proactive, having a proactive role in the process. So I'm really interested about what made you change your mind. Is it related with the current conjecture of the democracy crisis and the rise of far-right populism? So you see kind of a
Thank you so much.
more a less capable role of social movements to lead something with that, or is just rather because you rarely see led democratic innovations actually leading them? You said that they are rare. And so by being rare, do you think that it means we should abandon the research on why there isn't more social movements actually leading those democratic innovations?
Yeah,
we take
we take
one,
a few, but I had a clear answer in mind. Let me give it.
Okay.
So I step back a bit because I think there are not as many in the first place, and because there is a reason why there are not as many. In the moment you start engaging with the administration, with institutions, having the leading role, it's first very difficult, and secondly, not necessarily desirable. As in, you become one among many. And that's how democracy tends to work often. Since citizen-led is a normatively desirable category for me, the desirable behavior that I see is having a proactive stance rather than leading it. So there is this dimension. It's very difficult to do, and it's probably not necessarily the best thing if you lead a process. So it's good enough if you are proactive. But being proactive, as far as the process is concerned, not just the outcome, it's really a big deal. So no, I don't think we should get rid of this category that is citizen-led democratic innovations. Actually, we should study more, because in thinking about it, it's kind of the central characterization of democratic innovations for as far as matters of democratic quality are concerned. So let's focus it a bit more on it, but probably let's relax what we mean by leading. I hope it was somewhat clear. My answer. Okay.
Giovanni, you wanted to...
Also, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andrea. I have three different things. I try to be synthetic. The first one is about, I mean, I appreciate very much some of your sentences that we're trying to create a sort of Weberian orientation scheme. But I'm thinking about all that there is in the middle. For example, more single democratic innovations, single devices, have structural limits. For example, participatory budgeting is not able to create a vision. It's just normally summing small things here and there. It's not discussing any vision of the city, for example. Or citizen assembly normally have a big difficulty in communicating to people, especially for those that are skeptical about politics, the way in which they selected the people. And so it seems that this statistic thing is just an exercise of friendship or friend of the mayors that come here. So it's not able to communicate with the larger public. Now, so you have a macro audience that is not aware or is not trusting the experiments. So you have these structural limits, and then you have conjunctural limits that are how the thing is done. It can be done badly or in a wrong way for the need that there was in that territory. Specifically, when you were talking about the Gilets jaunes, I'm not sure that the process, the deliberative forum was totally wrong. The problem is that from the forum were forbidden some topics, and they wanted to discuss those topics. So the conjunctural way in which the tool has been used was wrong in the end. So I'm wondering which kind of relation exists between the structural limits and the demands of that instrument that can be not understood in its limits. It happens to me a lot that people ask for participatory budgeting and they don't understand that this is not the right tool for that situation. And then the conjunctural one. That's the first thing. The second is it's about if I take as a provocation an institutional point of view, I have been for 5 years coordinating the Authority for Participation of Toscania region. And one of my large difficulties was to see some social movements wishing to challenge themselves using institutional tools. It's like in some cases we had the public debates, they didn't want it, they didn't activate for 6 years. No, because maybe in my view, when I was talking with them and trying to incentivize them to use the tool, it was easier to do some things that they were already doing, like blocking a street, than going to discuss on maps with the government they didn't trust. No, so I'm wondering if there is in the choice of or in the choice of not using a democratic innovation, there is, by the point of view of Hector, also some lack of desire of using that tool to challenge the path dependence from previous ways of doing. The third is just a very short curiosity, and it's about James Fishkin experiments. In many cases, I felt, also from the description that there are on its website of the Stanford Center, that they are exercises. They have an agreement, a minimal agreement with the local authority or with the regional authority for imagining some alternative, but then it's not put at work. They continue to be the exercise to 2, 3 times, 10 times to assure that the method functions. And so I feel like people like guinea pigs in those experiments. At the same time they are done. So what do you think about this type of experiments, using the people more like guinea pigs? Are those inside your vision of an actor that is not participating in our public sphere, just doing his own job?
Thank you. Maybe if you agree, since Giovanni asked 3 or more questions, you may want to first answer to Giovanni, and then we go for a second round.
Yeah. Thank you, Giovanni. I have to ask 3 questions at least. Thanks for your for being here, for your questions. Demands that cannot be met due to structural limits, asking for the impossible. That is a problem, and it's also due to the fact that people don't know about these devices, don't know how they work. They have a life, essentially. But I think in society, we tend to do this with respect to anything, really. So when we use some digital technologies or some new apps, it's either very simple or very clear what they are for, or we don't use it appropriately. So now everybody uses ChatGPT in a smart way, the way it is meant to be used, including myself. So what I want to say is that we are introducing into society very complex things, and not everybody has the time to understand it. And we gotta live with it. I don't know if there is a way to improve this dynamic. So sorry not to be able to go to say more of this. Social movements did not actively did not participate in participatory tools, did not get involved in participatory tools in your experience in the Toscan case. Perhaps they do not want to challenge themselves. So social movements are political actors that, like all others, have stakes, interests. And the odds that collaborating with the administration pays off in terms of your political struggle when you are a critical actor are very low. So there is a disincentive. I don't know if that's the right word in English. It's the opposite, an incentive to participate, regardless of their willingness to challenge themselves. As Francesca Polletta showed, whether or not to engage with institutions, it's always a dramatic moment for social movements. And I think democratic innovations fall squarely in this situation and face the costs of it. Deliberative polls copyrighted. What do you want me to say about deliberative polls? Many things have been said, good and bad. I think they are fully representative of the academic approach to democratic innovations, which has certain qualities but not others. And I think among those that are not really strong, it's the democratic popular support demand for it. So it is of great value for advancing the science of deliberation. It's of less value for other democratic and legitimate ends. I hope that's satisfying.
We have, okay, Inish, can you hear us?
Yes, hello, good morning.
Hello, Inish.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. Yes, I had a question for you about social innovations and democratic innovations, because you had this point on social movements, which I found is really interesting. Also, in our research, we've been noticing that a lot of alternative political movements also ask for instance, citizen assemblies. But I also found some parallels between democratic innovations and social innovations in recent research that I've been involved in. And you mentioned DECIDIM. One of the cases is DECIDIM and how it's used by cooperatives in Catalonia. So that's been a case study that I've been engaged in. And I was wondering what you think about that, about this relationship between democratic innovations and social innovations, if you see that, and what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ines. Guia, you wanted to jump in?
As you prefer, Chair.
Let's take another one and then
He will answer.
I can answer to it's a bit connected to her question. So it's again about, but first of all, thank you very much for your talk. I really like it, and yesterday one. So my first point, and is something that maybe is a question, is something that is not really clear to me, coming from a social movements perspective, so that I see these things from this side that usually democratic innovation scholar, well, you know what I mean.
A different point of view.
Yeah. So about the fact that there are not so many social movements that are directly asking for democratic innovation as a priority claim.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a kind of sometimes secondary claim connected to implement some other kind of change, like a policy change or cultural change, etc. And for me, this is not really clear how you can establish this division, because for many social movements are kind of a big universe, so with very, very different kind of factors, very different actors, they act in a very different way, but there is some kind of common thing that the way our strategies are chosen, just strategy for protest, also strategies for decision making, cannot really be disconnected from the result, from the claim. So the strategy in itself is a message. So when social movements implement more democratic innovation, well, let's call this way, but it can be some new democratic practice, or to involve, I don't know, vulnerable people from the shanty town in the assemblies, or when they do some participatory process inside their organization. So this is also a claim in itself. It has some prefigurative aspect. So it's not really unconnected to the revendication. So I don't know if it's really helpful to do this division between the revendic claim and such, also because there are many other strategies of decision making that are apparently much more effective, but they don't reflect the claims or of the revendication or the ideology of the movement, so they cannot be used. So in a certain way, we see this a lot in social movements, in my opinion. And another point is the fact about those who was mentioned by Giovanni. Again, I would like to address this fact of social movements being very different, and also social movements are very compounded actors. They are not actors, they are processes more than actors. So we have many actors that are some organizations, different individuals, very deep networks, etc. And there are a lot of collaborations with institutions. The most of the literature and social movements have been James Jasper, etc. They are talking much more and more of this idea of players and arenas, where the arenas are much more overlapping between institutional and non-institutional, than rigidly separated. So for this, we find a lot of institutional actors. We found this during the anti-austerity protests in Portugal, people from the municipality of Lisbon that were signing the call for demonstration, for instance, the Orchestration Troika, and they were part of the social movement against the national government. And also we see many activists that are engaged with local institutions, for instance, not municipality, but also the parishes, etc. This is what I was saying yesterday. So I don't know if this kind of very rigid division between institutions and the social movements arenas are very effective in terms of a research agenda. So maybe this is, I don't know, a little bit to discuss.
Okay, fantastic.
Please.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ines, for attending the seminar from online and for your question about social innovation, democratic innovation. Democratic innovation is a really narrow label that captures a host of different phenomena, but according to my usage of it, doesn't capture all that which is changing in our democracies. And this might be a pity because there is much more than democratic innovation happening in our democracies. And at the same time, it's you know, an admission of our limitations. So social innovations are occurring, are shaping democracy, perhaps even more so than what we traditionally refer to as democratic innovations. They are important. Hopefully they will be included under in the research agenda on democratic innovations, but if not, it's not necessarily the end of the world. As long as they happen, as long as someone studies them, their democratic potential is safeguarded, regardless of whether you use the lenses of democratic innovations, which have nothing against doing. So that would be my take on your question. Thanks once again. Regarding your point, you rightly highlight that social movements do engage in democratic innovations. I think if that's not what I passed, then it's my problem, my mistake. I do believe that social movements do engage in democratic innovation practices.
No, what I suggested was when you say that they do.
It's an answer. No.
They do. They reivindicate democratic innovation as a first claim, but it is many times secondary to other.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there is a continuity between the means and ends of their democratic action, but it's not always of the kind that we study when we focus on democratic innovation. So it does happen, what you're saying. It doesn't happen all the time. Likewise, the collaboration with institutions is there, but it's not always there. And these are actors that really focus a lot on conflict. And I think we should safeguard. We should remind ourselves about this more often. It's not that they're good when they collaborate and they're bad if they do conflict, because they're there to create conflict, to create new knowledge.
But institutions too. Certain institutions are also part of social movements.
Certain institutions are also part of social movements.
And they are also engaging in conflict with other institutions.
Yeah, but so there are similar dynamics occurring in institutions, but the overlap then comes up as a result. It's something worth studying and thinking about. At the same time, democratic institutions are not expressions of the public sphere. So since they are ontologically different, in my view, it's good to safeguard this distinction and be open to the possibility of overlaps when that happens. But I don't have the same demands on social movements as I have for democratic institutions. If social movements misbehave in certain ways, they're entitled to do it. Institutions cannot do the same thing. So that would be my take on it.
Okay. Okay. Tiago and Kadir, maybe? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrea. Great to see you again. So I had a lot of comments, even from yesterday, but one thing that strikes me and always comes to my mind is, you know, this is not something new, as you mentioned. So in terms of social movements strive and want democratization of their own daily relations, as we were saying, this prefigurative attempt in their daily lives. So I was wondering, there are a lot of political traditions that ask for this, right? Since the 19th century, at least the Rodonians, the Marxists, and so on. And I was thinking also, not from a Western point of view, like the Kurds. The Kurds have like this attempt and this experiment to a war and so on, that they were able to have these local councils, right, that made decisions. So I was wondering, how do you see the role of, so because you have this term that was coined in 2009, but I was wondering, how social movement traditions infuse then their practices into institutions, and yeah, I think my question is that, and if you want to comment a bit on the Kurds as well, if you know something about it, obviously.
Thank you. Let's collect another question and then Kadir.
My question is related between the relation between the social movements and the democratic innovations. My information is limited about social movement, but as far as I know, social movements can trigger or generate or demand for like democratic innovations. But I'm curious about like what happened to social movement after the democratic innovations, how the democratic innovations had like a transformative effect for the social movement. And do you want to like highlight any example like that to see the relation between the social movement and democratic innovation after the things happen?
Can I add the question or
Yeah, no, fine.
I mean, it's a very specific one, which has to do with citizens more than with social movements. So I understand that you are reconsidering whether, for example, the definition of citizen-led democratic innovations should be rephrased as for example, publics-led. I mean, the concept of publics makes more sense than citizen. And it's interesting because actually, I mean, if we take the concept of citizens more seriously, then, I mean, we should consider what it means, for example, to be a non-citizen today in our society, and what it means then to be a non-citizen and to demand for a democratic innovation. What's the space that we have in the public sphere as a non-citizens to actually have a role in leading whatever participatory or deliberative initiative. And added to this, I mean, so we have the issue of the non-citizens, but we have also the issues of the non-demands. What I mean is, there are cases where we have demands, but we are not aware of those demands, right? I mean, or at least we don't have the right words to formulate the demand, or we don't have the skills, let's say so, or we don't have the capacity to actually push forward that demand. So how does this work? I mean, because as researchers, we can risk, or we may end up saying, okay, there is no demand, and then somehow also banalize something that is more complex than that. Maybe there is a demand, but maybe that demand has not found the more fertile ground to grow and to find the words to actually formulate that demand. So how do you, I mean, I wanted to understand what you think about the non-citizens and the non-demands, basically.
The psychology.
Yeah, this was my psychological
They mentioned
take on that.
You mentioned, okay, cool. Social movements tradition. Okay, social movements.
Yeah.
I may ask now, because I'm also a social psychologist.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
there you go.
We're working in social psychology of citizenship. So Roberto was speaking, and I was thinking, well, first of all, I was thinking that this was a very interesting presentation and very thoughtful, really helped me in thinking some conceptual issues. And I share a conceptual issue with you, which is how are we going to call the citizens that are proposing something? A social psychology of citizenship means that we are dealing with the institutional sphere of the state and the relations between this institutional sphere and the sphere of the citizens, right?
Mm.
But if we consider this to be a relationship, there is an in-between space here between the institutional space of the state and the citizenship, the space of the citizens. There's an in-between space that can only be occupied by collective, organized collectives, all right? And so our puzzlement is on what are the concepts that we need to talk about these organized collectives. You call them publics, not citizens only, but we could say that there is in this in-between space a number of different and varied ways of citizens getting into collectives to make demands. Like a continuum, they have to be in collectives, but they can be more or less organized. And in some of these organizations, we could call them maybe middle range institutions. We don't need to reserve the word institutional only for the sphere of the state itself. We could call them middle range or intermediate or mediating institutions like associations or cooperatives or other forms of collective organization. And if we consider this as our concept in this middle ground here, maybe it solves the problem that you have there, and it solves some of the problems I have to reconceptualizing this.
Okay, thank you for this. Thank you for the nice words. It's always good to hear that it's been of some use to share some ideas. Okay, then I'll get to this point, but I start from the beginning. Social movement tradition infusing innovation in institutions. I think this is being studied with different sensibilities from different backgrounds, and those who study it are aware, or should be aware, that this has always been happening from a historical point of view. Socialism really shaped parliamentarism. Regressive movements as well. Fascism really shaped democratic institutions in the sense that they destroyed them. Okay, so this has been going on forever. But what's interesting when I think about social movement having a tradition of infusing innovation institutions is that many times social movements don't aim historically for democratic innovation as much as for democracy. So their demand is about democratizing systems. So the fact that we focus on democratic innovation led us to interpret their demand as demands for that. Historically, they've been asking for a bigger game that is so the demand for democratic innovation doesn't make sense probably only as such, but in the context of a broader challenge to the status quo in a democratizing sense. Kurds, what now I cannot say any expert word about it besides of taking the opportunity to acknowledge my shameful and limited Western-centric approach to this topic because I'm not capable of covering outside of, mostly outside of Europe, Western democracies. So, but for sure, Kurdish movements have been studied heavily, also in terms of their capability to engage democratically. Then, so I cannot comment on it because I don't know enough What happens to social movements after democratic innovation was attained? And this is a nice theoretical and empirical question that I think you are in a good position to try and answer. So I have just anecdotal evidence and not social science research. I think that democratic innovation is one bit that you get out of your broader struggle. And it can be a sweet cookie, so something you can boast. It could also be a bitter pill, because when you invest in collaborating with an administration, which has to happen in the context of democratic innovations, then you will be held accountable in your circles for how things went. And if they went wrong, that is, you did not attain the hoped for outcome, you have to explain, you have to give reasons for it. So I think as in many other political phenomena, it's something that can give very different results at the end of the day. But studying it empirically, I think it's something that should be done at this point, because we start to have that kind of situation. And then yesterday, there was a very good question also about how democratic innovations die. So what happens to them when they have done what they leave behind? So these are interesting new topics. Your question about non-citizens. So in the first place, perhaps I stressed it more yesterday than today. In democratic innovations, citizens, as far as I understand, are more often invoked than involved. Not even the greatest, in the most inclusive process will touch a tangible segment of the population. But all of them will systematically appeal to their democratic aura, their good qualities when it comes to the way citizens conduct politics. And so, it's not just non-citizens that are not involved in this. It's also citizens that are not involved in this. But citizens at least are evoked more often. Non-citizens, less so. But in saying this, I should be aware that democratic innovations, probably because they're relatively less important in politics, are more open to non-citizens. So this is a space where non-citizens can be involved. And also publics, as opposed to citizens, are places where non-citizens find some politically welcoming context. So is there much going on? Probably not, but there is a good disposition probably that should be exploited for democratic ends, probably. Maybe there is a demand, but we cannot see. I think for sure that might be the case. And that's need to be understood. Yet, I would be beware of what's the term for it? Of a Leninist approach to this. It's like, the people want it, they just don't know it. I think that is counterproductive. So I would push this, but I wouldn't push it too far. Maybe, okay, coming to the last question, comment, it is a very helpful thought that you shared. Thank you for it. How do we conceptualize that in between, the stance between institutions and citizens? I think this idea of middle range institutions can be interesting, even more so intermediators, because institutions, for me, from my understanding that I borrow from people before me, institutions have certain characteristics, including stability, whereas these actors might well come and go after a time. So maybe not middle-range institutions, but intermediators is very interesting, or maybe middle-range institution. I don't know. I would need to think about it, but it does capture something that is happening in that space. No, but the other the scholar that I think has thought more systematically about this is Nicole Doer, a colleague from Germany now, or Copenhagen. Okay, Copenhagen, and talking about political translators. So those kind of actors, they really translate what the people are asking for to the process, and what the process is asking of the people to the people, and sort of. So it's a sort of activist, but not necessarily activist. People that are interested in politics and are willing to be intermediators. Linguistically, in the first place, Nicole Doyle studied a lot deliberation in California, and more marginalized groups tend to speak Spanish, for instance, and participatory devices tend to be in English often. So the translation work there, it's really literal, but there is a category of political theory that is the political translator that Nicole Doyle studies better, more than anybody else. Mediators, mediating systems. Yeah.
Sometimes we work with that notion.
Mediating. Okay. Thank you.
Any other question, comment?
You look like you don't want to threatening people, menacing.
Okay, so teach me how to do this.
We don't want more questions. Joking.
I also have another one. But
Okay, two small questions and
then we go.
Just adding to what Paolo was saying, that organization, associations, groups are part of social movements, are social movement organizations in a certain way. So social movements are not just individuals that come this idea of spontaneity or completely, but in social movement literature is very highly criticized that there is just unconnected people with any kind of structure and organization, associations, also part of parties, part of trade unions. As I was saying, small part of the local institutions. These are considered in social movements because of social movements. So, so in the way there are yeah. So in a certain way there are already maybe the tools to look at this.
On this point, mediating actors, we have mediating actors that are called the political representatives and labor unions. But so far they've been catering for representative democracy and not for democratic innovation. So it would be good to look at mediating actors catering for democratic innovations. I think there is something to this, but when we say mediating actors, intermediary actors are in a crisis, yes, those catering for a representative democracy, representative understanding of democracy. Those for catering for democratic innovation maybe are being born as we speak, because this phenomenon is more recent.
Let me see if I'm getting. I'm not sure. Let me give you an example here in Portugal. So climate assemblies, right? Okay, so you gave the example of Extinction Rebellion demanding for it, but there are also some NGOs that are demanding climate assemblies, and in Portugal, one of the main ones is Zero. The Zero. It's called Zero. It's an NGO defending. Yeah, no, right. So is that an example of?
Well, probably we should ask our colleague if it is an example. But is Zero an example of this
intermediate?
From my view, given what we said, it could be. But I don't know if you had it.
Well, what was on my mind was, we've been celebrating the GDP celebration last month. And there was this process, SAL process, of the building houses.
We talked about it yesterday.
You know, but the way the process was organized was the government, the institutions of the government. They said they would support the movements of the people wanting to construct houses, but only if they constituted themselves as associations or cooperatives. And this is what I mean.
Yeah,
I couldn't explain it better.
nudging theory sort of. No, I'm joking, but it's like you have to do this
Yeah.
and
Become an institution,
to get a reward.
become an institution, to be a partner.
Yeah.
There is also the opposite, because in the Tuscany region, funding is not given to any legally existing association, and only groups of citizens can apply for the funding, because they are scared of this appropriation in terms of
And then
find more market.
and then you have the in-between example of the BIP-ZIP, sorry, because the BIP-ZIP is a local program of the municipality of Lisbon that gives funding to mostly NGOs and but also informal social groups. But then you have this technical nuance. I mean, the informal social groups are not allowed to formally receive funding, so they make they're included in the partnership that leads whatever kind of project you want to implement in a specific neighborhood. This is how it works, but they are not formally allowed, to receive funding. So maybe they receive. I actually don't know how they receive some funding from the program, but there is a mix. So.
The idea of the citizen is the idea of the self-attribute. And what we have here in this space is people coming together as collectives, but with different levels of formalization of these collectives, but as collectives.
Yeah, it's a good point.
No, I visualize in the image that these kidney stones that usually fluctuate in the kidney, and sometimes they get together and they create a big stone. It's an image, but because I have this problem.
Yeah, so it's not always for the better that people get together. It's not. Okay, it's an interesting aspect of the broader discussion we've had. So,
any other question or? Okay, so I don't want. Do you want to say something? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for kicking off this collaboration between the two seminar series. We will keep you updated, and from September onwards, we will.
The toilet flush also.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Thanks also to people online. We are closing now the Zoom, right? Yeah, we can close it. Okay. Bye bye. Posso fechar aqui?
Okay.
Non perdemos a gravação.
That would enable to more